I think she's going to labor out of
Jimmy, can you stop?
Okay, so sit up, please. Julius. This is the second part of the zonations, or excuse me, of the rocky shore. Okay, we started talking about that last time. We talked about some of the characteristic animals, some of the characteristic adaptations that are needed by those species that live on the rocky shore. And today we're going to be talking about, more specifically, what areas exist within the rocky shore specifically. All right? Rocky shores exist in Maine, obviously, which is why we're talking about that, and we're going to focus on that today. But more importantly, we're going to need to focus on what specific areas there are in Maine and beyond. Okay?
Okay.
I don't have any.
You just said you need some.
Yes.
And we said yeah.
And I said I don't have any. Tough luck.
So what do we do now?
Come do the lecture.
No, I'm not.
All right, then work on the coloring or something else. Okay?
She ain't in the mood.
Okay, listen.
I ain't gonna
Listen.
do it.
Okay, so
I ain't having it.
zonation. Okay,
That got annoying the first
Listen.
5 days.
zonation of rocky shores. That's what we're talking about. What is a zone? Okay, a zone, for our intents and purposes, is a distinct band at a characteristic height. Okay, it's a distinct band at a characteristic height. By height, I mean not necessarily, okay, I do mean vertical height, okay? But remember, it's not necessarily up and down, it's sloping. Okay, rocky shores slope down to the water. As the water comes up, it covers areas of it. Okay, so even though it might be, you know, the rocky shore goes like this, okay, and the water comes into here, this area here, and here, and here, all the way down into deeper water. These are the zones, the vertical zonation areas that I'm talking about. Okay? And if you'd like to see a picture, because I'm actually on top of things here today, you don't get to tell me what to do. I guess you do. Okay? Here. Okay? These are the zones we're going to be talking about. And this shows them on a vertical, like a ladder. Okay? From the ocean rising up. Okay? That's the easiest way to think about it, but remember that excuse me, not necessarily how it's going to exist in real life. Okay, a beach is not straight up and down, it's sloping. Okay, so just keep that in mind. All right? Practice. Maybe one of those days, huh? Okay, so, zonation. Now, within these zones, given species are only found, and that's what we're going to be talking about today, only found within specific areas. Given species found within zones. Okay, and these species are usually used to mark the zones. The goal here is by the end of this, you're all going to go to the beach. And instead of going to the beach and being like, wow, look, Rocky Beach, I'm here with my friends, it's so fun. You're going to be able to be like, oh, look, there are the key distinguishing features of the intertidal zone. Let me teach you. And you'll make more friends that way, because when people are at the beach, they like to learn about things like this, okay? They don't like to just stare at people in bathing suits. They like to learn facts, okay? So that's the goal here, all right? Keep that in mind, all right? Now, these zones are sometimes obvious, okay? And here I've got some pictures for you, okay? Oh, wait, this. Can you guys see that?
What's that?
Okay, these are the zonations, okay? Here you can see the distinct color band here, the distinct color band here, distinct color band here. Can you see that at all? Yeah, all right. Let me show you a different one. This is, that's not any better either. This is Maine, all right? Portland headlight. And you can see, can you at least see this dark area here, this light area here? Oh, okay. Okay. This isn't a perfect picture of the zones, but it gives you a general indicator that there are distinct visual cues, according to the species that live in these areas that create these zones that we're going to be talking about. Okay? This one doesn't show it as well. This shows, again, that sloping pattern. Okay? We're going to focus on those now. Right? So, what causes zonation? Okay, there's a couple of things. Mostly, zonation results from both physical factors and biological factors. Okay? And it's really the interaction between these physical and biological factors that creates these specific striations. Okay? And this is unique. Think about it. How many of you have been for a walk in the woods? Okay. Have you been walking through the woods and been like, whoa, there's a distinct band right here in the middle of the woods that only deer live in. And they don't go over there, they don't go over there, they just live right here in this vertical zone and nowhere else. No, I've never experienced that either, okay? Because it doesn't happen. There are, of course, areas and whatever, but this interaction between physical and biological factors in the Rocky Tidal Zone is unique to this ecosystem, and that's why we're talking about it in an entire lecture, okay? Yay. Okay. Basically, the upper limit of these zones is set by biological factors. Excuse me. Scratch that. It's the exact opposite. Set by physical factors. All those things we talked about last time, things like immersion, okay, desiccation, drying out. Basically, certain organisms, okay, can't move far enough away from the water. They're not adapted for that, so they're limited to how far they can go. That's one end, the upper end of these zones. The lower end, or the lower limit, is set by biological factors, meaning what feeds on them. Okay, there's much more predation underwater. Okay, predation during high tides is more common than during low tides. And therefore, these organisms can reach a certain level according to their adaptations, but can't go any further. But then, if they start to stray too far, too low, predation is too great, and they don't survive in large numbers. And this creates a band, a visible band, right, of either plant species or animal species along the rocky shore that are these zones that we're talking about. All right. So, what are these zones? The first one is the upper intertidal zone. They have really exciting names, called the upper intertidal zone, the middle intertidal zone, the lower intertidal zone. So the upper intertidal zone, okay, seldom submerged. Okay, at the very highest of high tides, it may be submerged during those full moon tides. More likely, though, it is simply washed with wave action. Okay, there's spray that might get moisture up there. But the species that live here have to be adapted to heavy amounts of exposure. Now, on your sheets, you have, it's 3 facts. I may give you more than 3 facts. You can choose to write down the first 3 facts. You can choose to write down the 3 facts most interesting to you. You could write down the last 3 facts. Doesn't matter to me. Just make sure you get 3 down there. Okay?
I really like your diversity.
Thank you. Differentiated. All right, so seldom submerged, species adapted to exposure, and wave action and splash accounts for most moisture. Okay? This area is also the area that is the buffer to terrestrial species. Okay? We'll talk about that a little bit more in a second, but this is the one that would border other ecosystems, whether that's deciduous forest, whether that's taiga, whatever it is, okay, if you're up in Alaska or the tundra, right? Other ecosystems, other biomes would connect via the upper intertidal zone. And organisms from those ecosystems would then be introduced to this zone primarily only. Okay? So what are the main species in the upper intertidal zone? We're going to try and focus this to Maine, the main species, right? But in general, it's lichen. Lichen is the largest, or not largest, it's the most statistically significant species, along with some types of algae, okay? Who knows what lichen is? Who can think back to sophomore year biology? Remember? Rosie?
You want to hear jokes about it?
No, I want to know what it is.
So it's kind
Oh,
of
it's a
related.
good one.
Is it a poem?
Okay.
Is it a limerick?
Hear it. Why did the fungus and algae get married?
Why?
They took a liking to each other. There you go. All right, I don't
That's
know.
really
I don't really
good.
remember.
You just said it!
Well, that's what
Lichen
it
is a symbiotic relationship between a fungus and an algae.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
I don't like it.
fungi, algae, okay? It's a mutualistic, symbiotic relationship, okay? Very important, the fungi stores water, and the algae fixes nitrogen from the air, okay? And so together, they live in perfect harmony.
How come they're on lichens on like mountains?
There are. Why?
Yeah, like I thought it was, you're like saying it's something to do with the ocean, but I just like climbed up the mountains.
Well, lichens can live in more than one place. In the upper intertidal zone, they are a key species, okay, along with the other species that we're talking about. That doesn't mean they live only in the upper intertidal zone. They do
But
other
how-
species of lichen can also live on mountains, on rocks, in backyard. How does algae travel a mountain?
Yeah.
Priceline, negotiator.
That's a waste of money.
They're airborne, they can be traveled, they can be introduced by other species, however they travel to other areas, and then they've adapted to those niches up on the mountain and those other habitats. Okay? They're probably different species of algae that form that relationship with the fungi and lichen. Okay? Anyway, moving on. Other species. There are also lots of different kinds of algae that are not symbiotically connected to a fungus to form a lichen. Okay? There are several different types. Here, Maine, we've got the red, brown, and green. Algae are some of the only organisms named exclusively by their color. Okay? Because they're that exciting. Black bears are as well, yes. It's true.
Why is that?
Wait, what?
Why?
Why what?
Why is the brown bear?
No, brown bears are brown.
Yeah, not all black bears are black, so then why is it black?
Well, they're more black than, say, a polar bear or a panda bear.
No. I went
Polar bears have black
and they
skin.
had a bear, and it was labeled black bear, but the bear was brown.
I don't know, Josie. I don't know. Maybe that was fading.
I think you're lying.
Maybe it was. Listen, Jenna,
Look it up.
I will look it up. Sure. Okay.
I had a cat.
Moving on. Also in the upper intertidal zone, all of our favorite friends, the periwinkle.
Oh.
Periwinkles. Brandon's only friend.
Stories I like.
Okay. These guys are important because, listen, they help keep the algae in check. They graze on algae. Okay? They graze on the algae. Do any of you know how periwinkles feed?
They graze on algae.
Is that's what they feed on? Do you know how they feed? What they actually do?
No. They go.
Curious.
Julius?
They like scoop them up like they're salad.
They absorb it.
That's not good.
Their hands.
Wow. Okay, write this down. They have something called a radula, okay, which is a raspy tongue. Okay, and they literally move along and lick the rocks and lick up all
I
that
like
algae. Okay? So you gotta scrape off the algae as they go. So next time you're at the beach and you see all those little cute periwinkles and you're making friends with them and they're stuck on the rock, what they're really doing is sitting there licking the rock. So if you want to make friends with them, you should probably do the same thing. Okay?
My
They
cat.
like that. It makes them feel more at ease.
Do they have like cats? How they have
Hooked tongue.
Does your cat lick rocks a lot? Does he eat algae off the rocks?
No, she licks my face.
Is it very rough?
Yeah.
My guinea pigs look like me.
Alright, moving on. Periwinkles graze on the algae. They have this raspy tongue called a radula. Okay?
Yeah.
Not all periwinkles live in the upper intertidal zone. Okay? Rosie? Not all
Rosie.
Rosie, if your cat is hurting you, maybe you should go to guidance, okay? But let's not talk about it right now, all right? Okay? Not all periwinkles live in the upper intertidal zone. There are species of periwinkle that live down below where it's moisture, okay? But these periwinkles have to be adapted for long-term exposure. And so they can do things like breathe air, okay, like a land snail. They've been adapted to that case, okay? They can live out of the water for months at a time. Subsisting only on moisture derived from splash zone. Okay, and they have a very high tolerance to temperature changes. We're not going to go into the specific species of periwinkle that live in the upper intertidal zone, but just know that there's a difference, because we're going to talk about periwinkles a little bit later on. These periwinkles that feed on this algae up at the top, okay. Other grazers include, besides periwinkles, you also have limpets, which we talked about last time. Limpets are also grazers of algae. Okay. And then finally, besides limpets, periwinkles, algae, lichen, okay, you have both terrestrial predators that move into that area sometimes, things like raccoons, okay, birds move in, but they don't necessarily live there exclusively. Same with some marine organisms that come in. Shore crabs, right, will come in and feed at this sometimes on either the algae, which they'll scrape off with their claw, or detritus, or other small organisms that might be living in the upper intertidal zone, okay, with all this algae and the limpets and periwinkles and electrons. So you've got birds, raccoons, okay, crabs. Just be aware that they're coming from two other areas into the upper intertidal zone to feed. Okay? And that's really the only reason for being in the intertidal zone is predation. Unlike the algae or lichen, which are there all the time.
I'm used to seeing that.
Yeah. Questions? Okay. Then let's talk about the middle intertidal zone.
Isn't it called an IZ?
It is. I told you that last time, didn't I? But now I'm writing it all out. Thanks. Okay. The middle intertidal zone. What?
You're welcome.
I like that. I like that.
No, you didn't.
It
Okay.
didn't look like it.
I mean, the underline on the disease going on as well.
Anyway, middle intertidal zone. Okay.
Not so lucky.
This area is regularly submerged and exposed. Okay, this is that area that's covered in the high tide, exposed to the low tide. Quickly, we're going to talk about tides a little bit more in our next unit when we talk about oceanic patterns. Okay, but a couple of things I just want to quickly differentiate for you are three kinds of tides. Diurnal tides. Okay, diurnal tides are tides that exposes organisms once a day. Semi-diurnal tides expose animals twice a day. Okay? You know that tides happen twice a day, right?
Huh?
Oh. No.
Uh-oh.
Can't read your sign.
Yeah, how are you?
See, now everyone's trying to look at you. Okay? All right, listen. Ladies, do something.
We did everything without.
Okay, then sit there quietly. Diurnal tides expose organisms once a day. Semi-diurnal expose them twice a day. And then you can have a mixed tide, which has one tide that exposes organisms, one tide that doesn't. Okay? So the lower of the two successive tides does not submerge. The upper, higher tide exposes bottom. Okay? So therefore, even within the middle intertidal zone, you're going to have even more zonation. We're not going to talk about those zones, but be aware that this zone has increased amounts of fluctuations. Okay? Not only do you have tides that are exposing it sometimes, leaving it exposed sometimes, or excuse me, submerging it sometimes, leaving it exposed other times. Sometimes it can be exposed and then submerged. It can be all back and forth. Okay? So this is an area of great fluctuation. But the best part about this one is that it's also easily discernible because its upper boundary is marked by barnacles. And this is where the fun facts get in. Because next time you go to the beach, you can walk up there and you can say, oh, look, barnacles. We must be in the middle intertidal zone. And everyone will be so impressed by you.
They won't know what it means.
Then you'll explain. Okay?
I'll just say it sounds weird.
Barnacles can't exist higher than the upper intertidal zone because they have to be submerged long enough. Okay, so they're not living in the upper intertidal zone, they're only in the middle. That's how you know as soon as you hit barnacles, you've reached the middle intertidal. Yes, sir.
Do all these effects in like the zones, they just pertain to like this area or is it everywhere?
Great question. I can say that all of these apply to Maine. Most of them apply to other areas. If you get up into the more Arctic coastal areas, like up in Alaska, they have absolutely rocky shores, but because of the tundra that's inland, it's different in several minute ways. Okay, so I don't want to say it's the same. Same in the Caribbean, it would be the same idea if you had a rocky shore in the Caribbean, the Galapagos Islands. But mostly it's the same. The zonations are pretty much the same. Okay? So upper boundary marked by barnacles because they can't go too high because of immersion. Okay, and they can't go too low because they get preyed upon. Okay, if barnacles are submerged all the time, they get fed on by whelks. Who remembers talking about whelks last time?
Dogwood.
Yay! Okay? And this is what happens to them. Okay? See this little hole right here? These are barnacles, yes?
Yes.
Okay. Dog whelks feed on the barnacles. And they crawl over them, and they drill a little hole in the barnacle shell, and they suck out the barnacle. Yay! Okay, and they feed. So if these guys, but that only happens during high tide. It only happens when the barnacles and the whelks are submerged. The whelks aren't crawling over land. You won't see, as you're walking along, a whelk crawling over to a barnacle and doing this. So if the barnacles are submerged too long, they get eaten. If they're so far up on land that they're exposed, they dry out. Thus that means barnacles exist in a very specific line. Okay? That is highly visible to us when we go to the rocky shore. And hopefully when we go to the rocky shore, we'll see that.
Where are
Okay?
you going?
I think in 2 weeks, when it's nice and cold. Okay? So, let's back to this. O'Brien marked with barnacles. Okay, other species. Okay, this is where mussels live.
Rosie.
Mussels are preyed upon by sea stars. Okay,
Credit.
preyed on, like eaten by sea stars. Preyed on by sea stars, yes. Predated, preyed, whatever. And also, this is where you find the rockweeds, which we are all familiar with, that we probably call seaweed. Okay? The difference being that these rockweeds have something called pneumatocysts, which are those air-filled bladders that help them float up towards the sunlight, help them get more sunlight. Okay, that you pop them and then you spray salt water in some, like your eye. Yes. Okay? Those are these rockweeds.
Can I have I have an interesting fact.
Hold on one second.
It's really interesting.
Pneumatocysts, which are air-filled bladders. Okay? And again, characteristic. When you're a little kid and you're going to the beach, and you're looking for crabs, you're lifting up seaweed, what you're lifting up is this rockweed. That's characteristic of the intertidal zone. If you're able to do that, then you're in this middle intertidal zone. Okay? You're not in the upper, you're not in the lower, you're in the middle intertidal zone if these rockweeds are present. Okay?
Can I see an interesting fact?
Yes.
The part that you pop is seaweed.
I don't think that's true.
Ask Mr. Hutchinson.
Okay, well.
I did project on him last year.
Okay. All right. Middle intertidal zone then. Upper level barnacles, lower level of these rockweeds, which leads us then into then the final zone, the lower intertidal zone. Okay. This zone is immersed most of the time. Only very occasionally during the lowest of low tides will this be exposed. Most of the time, this area is completely submerged. Okay? Remember what I said, it's during the submerged times that all the action happens. Okay? So barnacles, mussels, anything that's preyed upon by things like sea stars or whelks, periwinkles, aren't found in this zone. Okay? So barnacles, mussels, etc. Not found here due to predation. What this area is dominated by is seaweeds. Okay, they create these massive beds, right? Similar to the rockweed. And all of these compete for light. They are kept partly in check by the periwinkles. I incorrectly just said periwinkles don't live down there. That's not true. Mussels and barnacles do not, but periwinkles and other marine snails, worms do live here. Okay, and they're dominant. They keep the seaweeds in check. Okay, which also found in here, you can find sea urchins, which also feed on seaweeds, okay, and algae. You can find sea anemones, worms, slugs, and some fish are also found here. Okay, I'm not going to get into the fish too much because they have, obviously, there are things like sticklebacks, other species that are truly characteristic of the lower intertidal zone or tide pools, but we don't need to get into that much detail. And then what marks the lowest end is kelp. How many of you have ever been to the beach and found a big kelp frond? Seriously?
Yes, I
Well, okay, so let's try that again. How many of you have been to the beach and have found like one of those big kelp fronds? And now Leah didn't raise her hand. You guys are amazing. Okay? Kelp marks the lower end. Okay, so when you start finding that kelp, now kelp will wash up, but kelp has to be submerged all the time. So once you hit the kelp beds, then you're, or any kelp, then you're out into the fully open ocean. Can I see a picture of kelp? Show me a picture of kelp. Okay? So let's review real quick with my handy dandy pictures. Okay? Down here, okay, this would be where the kelp is. This is the lower intertidal zone. Then we move up, okay? Actually, they have kelp here. That's not really true. Oh, that's because they have these divided up into the middle into two zones. Know that. Okay? Then you've got the barnacles up here. Okay? Then you move up into the splash zone or the upper intertidal zone. All right? And if I want to see a picture of kelp, I don't know how to do this without doing.
If you have two Google, you can write it, like you can draw it.
Yeah. Okay. Kelp. Say kelp. 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 Okay, I don't know which of these species would be native to Maine. Okay, these look more characteristic of the kelp beds off the Pacific coast. Who, Megan, you researched sea otters, correct? Last year, okay. Sea otters, sea urchins, all those large fish species live in the kelp beds off the Pacific. Off the coast of Maine, we do have some kelp, and we have large fronds, but we don't have the characteristic kelp forests that the Pacific Northwest has. All right? All right. Any other questions? Okay.
What other